Hi, everyone. My name is John Swenson. I'm a 1984 grad serving on the UNH Alumni Association Board of Directors as the treasurer and chair of the Alumni Annual Giving Committee. Through its programs and services, the Alumni Association develops a spirit of loyalty to the university, engaging and serving alumni, students, parents, faculty and staff, and the public. Thank you for supporting UNH with your time today. We encourage you to take advantage of your Wildcat benefits by visiting the UNH Alumni Relations website at unh.edu/alumni. Today's webinar, Cryptocurrency, the Future of Finance, is another episode in the webinar series presented by UNH Alumni Relations. Today's moderator is Wenjuan Shea, Associate Professor of Finance at UNH's Paul College. Wenjuan Shea serves on the Paul College faculty and is a faculty fellow for accreditation and assessment for the school. From 2013 to 2018, she was the recipient of the Distinguished Virginia D. Professorship. Her research interest is in equity markets and investments analysis. She also has a significant interest in a number of studies and increasing interest in corporate finance, emerging markets, and financial intermediaries. Dr. Shea's scholarly work has been published in premier and high-impact academic journals. She has received her BBA and MS in finance from Peking University in Beijing, China, and her PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Our expert panelists will answer questions at the end of the webinar, so please note the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen where you can submit your questions throughout the program. And with that, I will turn it over to Professor Shea.
Thank you very much, John. It's my pleasure to moderate today's webinar of Crypto Clarified, the Future of Finance, alongside a wonderful lineup of panelists who are all industry experts. Some are from the more technology side, some are more finance, some with teaching experiences, and some are successful entrepreneurs. I'd like to mention that we have hundreds of registered audience from across the North America continent and also around the world. So let me begin by saying good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. Today's webinar will start with a short introduction around the panel, and then we're going to move on to some general topics and discussions about the design, features, current trends, and the future of cryptocurrencies. And then we will open it up for questions and answers. Like John just mentioned, please feel free to raise questions in the Q&A chat box at any time. And then during the Q&A session, we will select some questions for our panelists to address. A little bit about Paul College and myself. I'm an associate professor of finance and also the finance chairperson of the accounting and finance department here at Paul College. Over my 15 years of academic career, I've had students from my corporate finance, investments, and equity market courses who are interested in fintech and frontier development of cryptocurrencies and other virtual financial products. In recent years, cryptocurrency has been definitely an overwhelmingly hot topic. We have faculty members incorporating this topic in courses such as derivative securities, financial institutions, and financial modeling and analytics. We've also had students conducting research on crypto in their honors thesis and at the UNH signature event of undergraduate research conference every year. I know some of those faculty and students are in the audience today, so hello. And I believe it's definitely a timely and interesting discussion today for everyone in our alumni community, in the business world, and beyond. So welcome, everyone. Next, I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'm going to only highlight their titles and current engagements, and I'll let themselves talk a little bit about their experience and achievements. First, we have Mr. George Pullen. George is the partner, chief economist, and co-host of Space Economy at Milky Way Economy. He is the co-author of the book, Blockchain and the Space Economy, and he also serves as an adjunct professor at UNH Law School, where he teaches blockchain program, economics, and social impact of technology. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, George. Would you like to say something about yourself?
That was great. Thank you for the introduction, Professor Shea. The only thing I would add is that in addition to my personal businesses and my academic appointments, I also have a government position. However, I'm not talking today in any government capacity. So the views I express today are strictly my own and do not represent any of those of the US government. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Next, we have Chris Rice, a 1991 Paul College graduate, a longtime supporter of the UNH Paul College events and initiatives. So great to have you again, Chris. Chris has extensive experiences in the asset management and the investment industry, having worked in many institutions. And last time we talked, Chris served as the Senior Managing Director and Global Head of Cross-Asset Trading at State Street, I believe. And it's so nice to have you back again. I'm sure Chris will have a great deal of insights to share with us. Welcome.
Great, thank you very much. And I guess the only thing I would add as we go in this discussion, I did my first meeting on blockchain about 2.5 years ago. And I thought, wow, I've been in financial services for 30 years and it's just going to be so easy. And I walked out of that first meeting and I thought, oh my gosh, I only understood about 20% of what was discussed. So I would just say going into today, any question is a good question. And it just takes a little bit of time and it's like learning a new language, but very excited to be here today.
Great, thanks. Next, we have Samson Williams. Samson is a senior economist and space investment advisor at Milky Way Economy. And he's the president of the Crowdfunding Professional Association. And he co-authored the book we just mentioned with George, Blockchain and the Space Economy. He's also the adjunct professor at UNH Law School, where he teaches token economics. Very nice to have you on board, Samson.
Likewise, very happy to be here. I'll add that by training, I'm an anthropologist, which means I'm qualified to be George Pullen's emotional translator. So if he says something highly technical, I'll translate that into English. And my last point is, it doesn't matter what you get paid in. If you are not paid a living wage, it doesn't matter if you get paid in diamonds, gold, Bitcoin, Doge, or otherwise, you still won't make a living wage.
Thank you, Samson. Last but not least, we have Mr. Caleb Bannister. Caleb is also a proud Wildcat 2010 College of Engineering and Physical Sciences graduate with a CS degree. He is the co-founder of Layer Zero Lab. Layer Zero is the first trust-minimized direct cross-chain communication protocol, and it can enable native asset transfer across chains with unified liquidity pools and guaranteed finality. That's a lot of terminology, I have to say. Caleb calls himself a blockchain wizard, so I'm sure we will hear tips and tricks from Caleb. Very nice to have you.
Thank you. Good morning. Yeah, after we launched the company about a year ago, there was like $4.5 billion in some contracts, like on some blockchain. So there's some pretty wild applications you can make right now, and we're doing some pretty cool stuff. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. So today we have 4 panelists, and they're going to bring a wealth of knowledge and a lot of opinions about a pretty controversial topic. But let's start with basics. So George, maybe you can wear your professor's hat and then start us off with a pretty easy introduction about cryptocurrency. How do you easily explain crypto to someone that does not understand this concept at all? So what exactly are cryptocurrencies?
Sure, Professor Shea, thank you very much. So the way I start classes for UNH Law on this topic is we start with the basics. So blockchains are databases. And we all know that data is valuable, and crypto assets come in many different flavors. So as long as we get those first 2 concepts, we can build from there. So remember, blockchains are databases, data is valuable, and crypto assets come in a lot of different flavors. Now, the blockchain database itself is shared through a network, okay? Often you'll hear words associated with that network, like distributed and decentralized. Those are just fancy ways of saying that different people and entities have access and pieces of the database. Some of these are also public, or a public ledger is another term you'll hear. That's a description of the database itself. An example of a public ledger database might be, for example, land records. That's something we're all familiar with. Again, that could be on a blockchain. It's an example of a database, example of being public. Information gets onto these databases, gets onto these blockchains via nodes. Think of those as the mechanism by which to communicate. Next, all of the files information that comes through the nodes goes through a checks process. That checks process, think of it as the accountants of the blockchain. They prefer to call themselves miners. It sounds cooler, some people think. I love accountants, but anyway, the miners, what they do is they make sure that transactions occurring on the blockchain, I move $10 to Professor Williams, they're checking to make sure that I have said $10 to move to him. Many times they compete against each other for that. When they compete against each other, that's in systems called proof of work. That might be another concept that we have to go through. But if you think about that, that's basically me saying, I proved the fact that Professor Pullen can send money to Professor Williams, and we're all on the same page here. And here's my work. Here's the proof that transaction is okay. And they hit reply all. The rest of the people in the community agree, and then that transaction enters the chain. There's plenty of nuance here. There's other concepts like proof of stake and proof of reputation we could go into, but that's the basics. The last thing that's important to remember, and this is what connects it back to cryptocurrency, which was the second part of your question, is the cryptocurrency itself in this structure. Think of it as the reward that is both provided and the medium of exchange that is used for value. That's a complex concept, but again, just separate those two briefly. So it is the reward to the accountants, which we're going to call miners because that's what they've heard it called. It's the reward to the miners, but it's also the mechanism of value that I'm transferring. So I'm not moving a dollar necessarily, I'm moving a cryptocurrency that represents something else. For example, it could represent a Bitcoin or anything else for that matter. So that's a very high level view, and I hope that helps level set some of the conversations. And there's a lot of nuances here, which I'm sure we'll be digging into. Thanks.
Great, thank you. That's a 30,000 feet view, but still it touched on a lot of good details. Anyone would add to that? All right.
I can
go ahead, Samson.
Translate for George right quick. There's 120 people in a group text message. And so Samson has $100. He sends George $5. George sends Chris $2. We can all see this transaction happening in this group text message with these 120 folks in it. And so that's magic, because in that there is exchange of value. And because we can all validate what's happening, because we all have access to this group text message, I can't now say I have $100 million. Why? Because 120 people who have access to this can say, oh, Samson, you only have $95 left, because you can see all of the transactions that occurred. So when we think about blockchain, just think about a group text message. The only difference is sometimes you know my name and number, other times you're pseudo-anonymous, because we only have a number attached to that person or that entity we're doing business with. So when you're thinking about blockchain, just think about it like a group text message. The real magic in sending and receiving this value is there was no bank involved. And that's where the hocus pocus gets interesting when we talk about cryptos, stable coins, et cetera.
Great, thank you, Samson. That's an analogy everybody can relate to. I believe everybody had their fair share of decentralized group messaging experience. Well, then let's move on to a more technology-heavy question. Caleb, would you like to speak a little bit about blockchain technology per se? Is it exactly the same as cryptocurrencies? Or can you also mention the more general tokenization of financial assets relative to cryptocurrency?
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of people get into cryptocurrency because of Bitcoin or something like that. But I love Bitcoin, but I'm a computer scientist. And so blockchains came out after the Bitcoin chain came out, where you could actually program them to do certain things. And with that ability, you can build applications. And so with applications, everything springs up out of that, right? tokens, and everyone's heard of NFTs, you know, it's digital art that's secured by, you know, digital assets. Tokenization is basically kind of like an advanced form of cryptocurrency, but it just represents a digital asset. It's something that you can use maybe in different decentralized applications. But going back to the earlier point about how it's just like a database. There's assets like Bitcoin, which you can use to send. It has some value. You can use it to send a transaction. You have to pay for a transaction when you're committing something onto the blockchain. It's kind of like the base asset, but there's more advanced assets. And we kind of generally refer to them as tokens. They can have additional properties and things. They can represent, again, coins or art or land or various things, or you can use them in digital applications. From a high level, that's pretty much what tokenization is. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Caleb. Anyone would add to that?
I guess I would just add with tokenization that, again, back to the art collection, you could have an art collection that everybody buys into, and you think about, okay, we cut that in a bunch of pieces, and then how do folks exchange pieces of that art collection? Well, there's lawyers, there's contracts, there's a lot of inefficiency. And again, the foundation here is that distributed ledger technology just makes it a lot easier to create a way to exchange value. And that kind of gets in the world of titled real world assets relative to, again, getting over to cryptocurrencies, which is a bearer asset. So just to add that quick point.
That's a great point. Thank you, Chris. All right, now let's move on to the investor's view of cryptocurrency. Like, is it safe? What kind of wallet should I choose? Which exchange should I choose? Why is it an accepted form at some merchants, but not at others? What are the advantages and disadvantages of owning or trading with cryptocurrency? So anyone would like to jump in? George?
I'm happy to jump in on this one. So the first thing, and something that one of my former bosses used to say, Giancarlo, Crypto Dad, is DYOR, right? Do your own research. This is a hallmark and a slogan within the industry, and this is something that I cannot overstress. So when you are looking at engaging in business with an exchange, maybe that means you want to be able to process cryptocurrencies as a payment method for your business, right? Or maybe that means that you want to take a very small amount of your investment dollars and put them into a cryptocurrency. Be sure that you are doing your own research. There is a lot of good research out there. Some research that I would point to are things like the New York BIT license. That is something that provides a database of firms that have taken the additional steps and efforts to receive a New York BIT license. These are particularly important for exchanges that want to operate in New York. The reason that's important is going through those additional steps and taking those additional regulatory hurdles on to win customers has given them a certain amount of additional audit. I think it's important that you also rely on your own best judgments. I think the next thing to think about when we think about blockchains and the value, and this isn't a pivot from the question, but it's also what businesses are using blockchains in a way, and I keep on saying blockchains plural because there's more than one, what businesses are using blockchains for their benefit, right? So you don't necessarily have to look at a pure crypto play like you might hear on CNBC or something like that. You can look to see what businesses are using blockchain technology to leverage their good product or service. A great example is people who are working on real estate development projects, and then they are tokenizing those real estate development projects, which means that you can own fractional pieces of that real estate development as an investment for yourself. Another example are companies that are looking at blockchain for public health records. This is a great way to eliminate about 20% of the waste fraud and abuse. In our healthcare system, because of the way the blockchain technology seals records and also makes them transparent with permission. So there's a couple different things there just to highlight. One, do your own research. 2, look at government resources when they're available to you. And 3, look at businesses that are using blockchain as an enabling tool, not just whatever cryptocurrency has the most BAM on CNBC today.
Great, thank you, George. Any additional points our panelists would like to provide?
Just keep in mind, going back to that group text message analogy, do you want an immutable distributed record of all of your business's transactions? 10 out of 10 times the answer is no. There's a lawyer in your risk department will tell you why it's a bad idea. And so most of the time, you're not going to be using a blockchain. You're going to be using some type of database who has an administrator. So if you want to get very technical, if you want to know if you're dealing with a blockchain or a database, if you have an administrator, it's a database. If you can change it, it's a database. If you do not, it's a blockchain. And also, George was talking, I made this super rare NFT. And just because I tokenize this, or you tokenize whatever the artwork or piece of property, it does not increase the underlying value of this thing that is tokenized. So if you would like to send me $100 million for this, that's awesome. But keep in mind, before you invest your money, just because you tokenize a thing does not increase the underlying value of that thing or give it some kind of innate value. Keep that in mind.
Thank you, Samson. George, I will, I think so far my number one takeaway is the DYOR. And as an educator, I think I will definitely weave that into my finance education for my students. So you also mentioned the regulatory hurdles in this case. I think that's one of the factors that really contribute to people's sense of safety for any financial asset, in general. So I'd like to now touch upon the cryptocurrency legislative or treasury actions. Anything going on there? How will that shape things in the future? Maybe Chris, you want to start us off?
Sure. I think when you start talking about the regulatory question, you really have to start thinking about it. So if you have a US regulator, a Swiss regulator, a Singapore regulator, how is each jurisdiction viewing crypto? And they're all going at different paces and speeds. But to the point, I mean, look, regulators, goal one is protect the investing public. And I think the one thing regulators are looking at a high level is, in traditional finance, if you buy a stock through your Charles Schwab account, you buy it on an exchange, right? And then it goes into a custodian bank. So you kind of have these three different actors involved. And I think what the regulators are trying to pull apart right now, given the headlines and everything we're reading, is, well, what if you have an exchange that acts also as a custodian or an asset manager, and you start to get a bit of blurring of lines and the roles within digital? And so I think at a very high level, the regulators are looking at, and again, they've very dedicated teams, and I've worked closely with many of them. How do we take that traditional separation we've seen in the financial services world we know today and kind of think about where it makes sense in digital and crypto to do the same? Because I think when you start kind of mixing some of those roles together, there's a natural check and balance that has raised a lot of concern. So that would be my just kind of high level response to the regulatory question. Again, I think it gets down to jurisdictional and what different countries are doing. And then it's just sort of trying to apply the laws of traditional finance into this new digital world and how all the actors behave in the ecosystem.
Great, thank you, Chris. Anyone else would like to add to that? All right, so Samson, very impressive graphic presentation just now. Now I'm gonna call on you for this maybe crystal ball question. What is the future of central bank digital currencies? Because we know that you just mentioned the group text messaging, the decentralized ledger system. And then what if we have a stable coin that is backed by a central bank, pegged to a more tangible reference asset, let's say. Will that be the future? Or anything that comes to mind?
Sure. I'm going to throw Chris a softball for later and say that stable coins are in fact prepaid debit cards. And those are separate from CBDCs or central bank digital currencies. And so, again, if you have dollars, I don't have any paper dollars on it. You take dollars, you give them to an exchange, you charge you a minor fee, and they give you back these digital currencies. Here, you guys can all have a digital currency. And so when we're thinking about that, that's how quote unquote stable coins work. You take your rent money, you take your paycheck, you convert it into your stable coin of choice. That's a prepaid debit card. We can argue about those or debate those minutia. But when it comes to central bank digital currencies, one of the things that we should take away from that is that money in general, about 94% of money currently is already electronic. Very few of us get a paper paycheck. We mostly get direct deposit. We have credit cards. So when we're saying, oh, we're going to introduce electronic cash or electronic money, that's not necessarily accurate. The nuances to central bank digital currency is you don't need blockchain to launch it because, again, you need a database, you need an administrator. Secondly, they're programmable money, and you could either program it to pay its own taxes, program it to only be used at certain stores or locations, and are geofence it. And so then it comes down to, is that really your money? You can also program that money to expire, meaning if you don't use it in the next 18 to 24 or by 2030, it expires. How would you feel about that? And so when we're talking about the future of central bank digital currencies, we're just acknowledging we are moving into the 21st century. It is a digital ecosystem. And so how are we going to regard records of debt? Because money is just a record of debt. And so we're modernizing how we capture that record of debt. And we're calling it central bank digital currencies. And the nuance of that is because it's programmable money, it's going to open up a whole slew of privacy questions that we've never, ever had to consider before. Because again, when you can program it, you can also geofence it, tag it, and be able to not only track what that person is buying, but where they're buying it at. So it's going to open up a whole slew of questions that will be very interesting for some of the other lawyers to come up with. And meanwhile, we'll go back to just using cash only because cash is truly anonymous.
Yes.
If I could add one more thing there, just to really push us toward futurism in our thinking here for a brief second, is if you are transacting in a currency, which is a native currency, for example, within an ecosystem. So let's think about this within like a metaverse ecosystem. I'm using that with a little m, not the big M, so no trademark infringements. But if I'm using that with a little m, I have no presumption of anonymity, and I have no presumption of privacy to what I'm doing with that money. Okay, so that's a big difference between the cash in your pocket. And then we go the next step, which is not just a removal of privacy from businesses, which we already click the buttons all the time and give that away, but a removal of all privacy for regulatory and government oversight. It takes us down a potential road that many of us might not be comfortable with. I also would mention that this will also have huge impacts on potentially campaign finance because we actually know where all money came from and went. And so they'll probably never actually do it because of that, but that's a personal point.
Great, thanks, George. Anyone else want to touch upon this? Okay, great. Now I'm actually going to ask this controversial questions now. We all witnessed the collapse of FTX, a lot of scandals going on. Is it just purely liquidity issues, volatility issues, or there's something that we really want to know about the potential risk of, owning a cryptocurrency exchange it, or from an exchange point of view, that platform was just throwing us the kitchen sink so that we know, wow, this can happen, that can happen. So I'd like to invite all of you to speak a little bit about the current controversies and scandals maybe of crypto. And I'm sure our audience are very interested in this topic as well.
Well, we've touched on the idea of crypto, and crypto is a bearer asset. right? So you could have a $20 bill and write down the serial number. If you handed it to somebody and they ran off with it and went to the police and said, hey, I've got the serial number on my $20 bill, doesn't matter. It's bearer instrument, it's gone. So, and I think that kind of plays into FTX. And, you know, you have an exchange that also does some work on custody. So they hold assets as well. And you know, are those assets segregated? Lots of rules call it in the traditional finance space. It appears, and again, we're just learning this as it all plays out, were not followed in the case of FTX. And so if you have assets that are also custodied with an exchange and they weren't segregated and they kind of went somewhere, well, you know, that there's a lot of questions to be answered there. But again, I think it kind of gets back into the regulatory question, the state of regulation, what happened with FTX. And as we start to pull that apart, which we've been reading about for a while now, I think we're going to get to a better place and a more with more clarity. And again, particularly on regulation in the forward.
Great,
I
thanks,
just want
Chris.
to point out,
Caleb, go ahead.
I was just going to point out that as painful as it was, FTX kind of re-highlights the fact that if it's not your keys, it's not your coins. Like, that's one of the famous sayings in crypto. But one of the most beautiful things about blockchains is that people and individuals have sovereignty over their own money. Like, if you send someone some money, you're doing it of your own volition, and no one else can make you do that. Only you can, you know, click the buttons on your computer or your hardware or whatever. And that's a really powerful thing, but you have to be very careful when you give your money to someone else. Yeah.
Great.
I would like to add that don't be afraid to recognize that sometimes the emperor has no clothes. So if you see that the emperor has no clothes, just call it like you see it. Because George and I were partners, we're business partners. So I'm always trying to get him to go into real estate. And I haven't seen a cryptocurrency scam like FTX, where the scammers didn't actually convert most of their cash into luxury real estate. So if you want to know where the real value in the marketplace is, it's still luxury real estate. And last but not least, we should recognize that we're at a moment in history where it's called narrative economics. It's how things go viral. We have social media, we have Twitter, we have LinkedIn, we have Instagram and Telegram groups where folks can get together, get in a echo chamber. Sometimes they pump crypto, sometimes they dump cryptos, but it lends power to how we're such a connected world, where a butterfly can flap its wings on an exchange in South Korea and it sends ripples through the market. So keep in mind, if you see something that's hot, it's the next big thing. That's part of the power of narrative economics, because we live in such a connected world. And so if you're getting caught up in the FOMO, fear of missing out, you need to pause and think, why are you scared? And who thinks that they can scare you? And so just consider that, because that's part of doing your own research.
Thank you, Samson. George, you have anything to add?
I will add nothing specific to FTX for various reasons. Refer back to my previous disclaimer. But in terms of the comments that Caleb and Chris made, first of all, I'll echo what Caleb said. Not your keys, not your crypto. I have a T-shirt that says that. I have a sticker that says it next to the computer that I mine off of. It is a very important thing that you know. There is a way with cryptocurrencies, and to add in what Chris's point was, that serial number on your $20 bill, think of that as your crypto key. If you have that serial number, that is your crypto. Otherwise, it's not. Okay, so just again, just think of it like, you know, the dollar bills and the serial numbers. And to Samson's point, you know, FOMO can be very dangerous. In fact, we've seen this narrative economic impact outside of crypto, things like GameStop and AMC, where crowds of individuals have acted together to do things that economists and financial wizards could not have anticipated. And so know that that happens even more in markets where there is less liquidity and there are more information asymmetries. And I know that's a econ word, but when it's easier for me to know more than you do, and you don't necessarily know that you know less than I do. Okay, so and that's very much the case with certain aspects of the crypto market. So please keep both of those things in mind.
Great, thanks, George. I'd like to invite everybody to pop your questions in the Q&A chat box. And in a few minutes, we're gonna start selecting questions from your pool to ask our panelists. But at this point, let me ask one more general question. I know in our audience, we have high school students interested in this topic, a lot of college students, some of my very own students. So can you talk a little bit about the outlook of labor market demand and career development opportunities in crypto? Anyone would like to start off?
Well, I don't know if I've got I'll throw something out there, but I just think you think about, again, kind of crypto and cryptocurrencies, right? Stable coins and in crypto and in digital assets, broad writ. I think foundationally, though, distributed ledger technology, as it brings greater efficiencies to all manner of places across in financial services, specifically the ecosystem, I think there'll be continued demand as time goes on. I would just say perhaps we're taking a little bit of a breather right now, but I think long term the prospects are quite good.
Thank you, Chris.
I will also like to add that hopefully everyone here, your students, they want to be plumbers, like Mario and Luigi plumbers, because at its core, blockchain is not sexy. It's like the internet. So your business is not blockchain. You do not invest in a blockchain business. Back in the early 2000s, you could invest in an internet business, AOL, Comcast, Verizon, but you probably don't actually want to work at an internet business. You want to be one of the businesses that uses the internet to make money, Apple, Amazon, etc. And so too at blockchain. You don't actually want to be a blockchain business. Your business wants to leverage blockchain, much like every business leverages the internet to make money, which means at its core, you're going to be a plumber. So if you're thinking about, hey, I want to go into the future of digital assets, I think there is a strong future in digital assets. Those key things you could learn, Python, number one off the bat, probably are ArcGIS, Geographic Information Systems, because all data is going to be somewhere. And so there will be a big place for digital assets, a big opportunity to develop the new products and the new businesses. But if you say, hey, I'm going to be a blockchain expert, it's like telling me you're a Wi-Fi expert. Because once you tell me what the passcode is, I'm done with you.
I would add one other thing there. I think that, and this is one of the ways we like to frame it up for the Franklin Pierce students. And of course, I would encourage any of the students or from college or high school to look at Franklin Pierce and see where your future might be with them in the law. But with that shameless plug out of the way, I would say that keep in mind that right now we are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. The fourth industrial revolution is made up of four core parts. It is central around biotech, fintech, data, and new energy markets. All four of those are progressing faster than what we've seen other major drivers of previous industrial revolutions. You will hear this from other economists. I've published on this. It is something that is out there. I think that you need to think about that in terms of your career, because it's where convergence happens between the major influences of industrial revolution that the biggest opportunities lie. So where does a data economy touch new energy? Where does a data economy touch fintech? Blockchain, that's why we're all here, right? So there's a lot of ways to frame up your career path based on knowing that those are the mega trends that are driving economic growth. And also that's why Samson and I both believe that based on those four mega trends, the fifth industrial revolution will be the space economy, because each of those four trends has technology and advancements that lend themselves to space commercialization. So I frame that way for people thinking about their career and their career development. You need to know what the larger market is doing so that you know where you can be the most impactful.
Great, thank you. There's the big picture, there's concrete skills. I just want to mention that at Paul College, finance students are taking Python courses, both the master's and at the senior level. So that's really good to hear.
I just wanted to chime in there too. And if I were to try to get some high school students excited about the future, I just want to point you back to the last, 20, 30, 40 years and look at how technology has progressed. And now we're shooting rockets and cars are driving themselves and we have blockchain systems, but learn to code. I mean, I'm heavily biased, but Python, Solidity, JavaScript, it's going to be like an unbelievably useful skill and tool that you can use for the rest of your career. So find something you love and then learn to code as well, and it'll help you in the rest of your life.
Great. Before you mute yourself, Caleb, can I start you with one of the questions from the audience, which I myself wondered too. I've heard
Sure.
that crypto mining uses a tremendous amount of electricity to mine. Why is that?
There are, so as proof of work mining was invented for Bitcoin, basically, you're basically securing the network with electricity. I don't want to get into the technical details, but think of it like that. There's competition to earn Bitcoin rewards for every block that's being secured as the chain is being moved along. And so more and more electricity is being consumed to try to secure the network. Eventually, people started using GPUs in their computers, and then specific hardware units were developed called ASICs. It's just a piece of hardware that consumes a lot of electricity to try to earn Bitcoin. I've actually been in some of the farms that mine Bitcoin, and it's like this huge noisy server rack room. It's like 110 degrees in there. But it's not necessarily a good thing. And actually, the Ethereum blockchain very recently moved to something called proof of stake. They're moving away from that like unnecessary consumption of electricity, and a lot of other chains are doing that now too. It's definitely something that most of the chains are trying to move away from. They don't want to use all that electricity. There's other ways to secure the networks.
George?
I do have to do one counterpoint there with an overlay on energy markets in general. So when energy is the primary input cost of any good product or service, like it is with the Bitcoin blockchain, providers of that good product or service will gravitate toward the lowest cost of energy that they can access. So what that has actually meant in many cases is that many solar farms and wind farms have been developed around mining facilities. And so because that's one of the cheapest forms of energy when you price in the subsidies and the negative pricing that you're allowed to have with both solar and wind. So I make that comment because please don't picture like a new coal plant being built in New Hampshire that is going to mine Bitcoin. That's not what's happening. But I just want to make sure that was clear with people when you think about unit costs for energy for any good product or service, Bitcoin or otherwise.
Great, thanks. Next question, I know that we mentioned the $20 bill serial number as an analogy for key, but there were still some questions about what exactly is a key for crypto, and also what is a wallet, especially what's the difference between a hot wallet and a cold wallet?
I can take this one. What ultimately controls your digital assets is a cryptographic signature, and so usually people will think of that as like a seed phrase, which is just a random string of words, but it ultimately boils down to this gigantic number, and only you know it. And if you want to sign a transaction, which means you want to send somebody money or you want to call a function on a blockchain, you need to sign like the message with that number. And then the way it works on the other side is they can prove that it was you that signed it, but they don't actually know that private information that you signed it with. Usually people will use a wallet in their computer like MetaMask, or there's these browser plugins you can use, and we generally refer to those as hot wallets because it's kind of stored in your computer. Your computer has access to the internet. It's not that it's not secure, but it's kind of hot because your computer isn't air gapped from the internet. There's like cold wallets and cold storage, which could literally be something that someone had written down on a piece of paper, and when they're signing transactions, they're not even letting it like touch something that's electrical, which seems a little bit wild in this day and age of technology, but that's generally the difference. Yeah.
So in our Q&A boxes, there are many other technical questions, but right now let me shift towards a more finance question at this point. Who or what sets the value of a crypto? Because I think the sense of not having an underlying asset still bothers a lot of investors. Who can take this one?
Supply and demand.
Yeah.
Supply. So that's going to be your, econ professor answer, but supply and demand sets the price of everything. We're just used to being told that supply and demand comes from sources that we understand. And then we're given a 24-hour cycle of business news that says, well, that's why it's this and that's why it's that on both sides of the equation. Supply and demand is largely unknown for many markets, and supply and demand is what sets the price of all markets. So for any given cryptocurrency, if Chris and I agreed right now that he could have all of my cold stored Bitcoin 3 months from now, and at a price of $25,000 each, we just agreed to that, and that just is setting up, a demand signal 3 months in the future. So I just want to reiterate, this is supply and demand, and that is the only thing that sets the price of anything.
Yeah, George.
Go on, you first, Chris.
No, I was just going to say I agree with that, and I think to the extent that there are markets for supply demand, you have very fragmented markets, and so the idea for the most efficient market is to, in a virtual way, pull all of that supply and demand into one spot. And so I think that's an area of efficiency that can help improve pricing. But yeah, spot on, supply demand, and that's the primary answer there.
Cool. I don't know Chris enough. I don't know Chris well enough to make fun of him, but I know George well enough to make fun of him. And so I have to point out that George is a believer in the Church of Bitcoin. And so if you have the faith that Bitcoin will go up in value, well, there you have it. That's his version of supply and demand, because we have a conversation about the price of Bitcoin versus the value of Bitcoin. So what makes Bitcoin valuable? It's not a business. It doesn't generate revenue. All other businesses are business. The reason that Amazon is worth as much as it is because it's got a lot of customers and it generates gobs of revenue. Whereas Bitcoin, it's not a business, doesn't have a CEO, doesn't have an HR department. So what gives Bitcoin its value comes down to faith. George is a real big believer. So when the believers tell you, oh, it's all about supply and demand, what creates the demand? FOMO. And so just take whatever George says with a grain of salt. Or whenever someone says, give me your rent money and I'll give you this digital thingamajiggy in return. And I promise you, if you hold on to it with diamond hands and laser eyes, it's going to go up in value. And I'm going to conclude by saying, I'm almost done with my super rare NFT. And if we could get the demand for it to be at $100,000, we can sell this to you. And then after I sell it to you, I will explain to you that the NFT is actually just a receipt. You don't get the physical copy of this.
Thank you for that, Samson. Very helpful. All right, another regulatory related question before we move on to technology. Governments need taxes to exist, and traditional finance supports that notion. Crypto is not yet taxed except on a voluntary basis. So when governments start taxing the anonymous nature of crypto, will that have to be reviewed, and how soon do you believe that's going to happen?
Having paid a ridiculous amount of taxes for cryptos because I had a liquidity event, meaning I cashed it out. At the top of your, when you fill out your very first, at the top of the new tax forms, the second question is, have you ever seen, touched, held, sniffed, or looked at cryptocurrency? And if you use an exchange, they capture for purposes of KYC, your customer checks and AML, anti-money laundering, they capture your social security, your demographics, so they can send you a 10K or 1099 to say, this is how much you had. So you are definitely, if you haven't paid taxes on your crypto, one, it's probably true because you have losses, but you still want to document those losses to take appropriate deductions, but of course, get an accountant to help you with that. Oh, all to say is your cryptos are not anonymous. If you have gains or losses, it's not anonymous if you're using an exchange.
That's a great point. All right, now back to technology. There's a vast majority of questions about blockchain and also AI. So let's ask a little bit about blockchain. So it can be probably applied to many other everyday areas that non-finance investors can relate to. So there were questions about its application in like ride sharing, social media, and voter ID verification. So maybe Caleb or someone else could speak a little bit about the blockchain technology application in a more like a broader way.
Sure. The conversation about like how blockchain can support identification comes up all the time. Because what fundamentally gives you ownership over like your address or your account or your ability to sign transactions or send money is this private key. If you can be kind of like locked to that private key and it's known that you're like me, Caleb, is this address, then like that is my identity. And so one of the blockchains, Ethereum, is working on this single sign-on kind of like Ethereum logon key. Like, you know, we have accounts to log into Netflix and all these different applications. Wouldn't it be cool if we could just log in with this one token that identifies me uniquely? It sounds pretty awesome. With regards to how some of these things work with like ride sharing and things, those are just kind of application specific use cases.
Can I do something? Can I do something
Mm-hmm.
on the rideshare one? So this is a concept that I've talked about often. I always try to make sure I talk about it with my Lyft or Uber driver. So one of the mechanisms that has gained a lot of recent attention are DAOs, or decentralized autonomous organizations. If I was to simplify DAOs in a couple words, it would be they are this generation's equivalent of unions, and unions are great. And so if you have a DAO, and that DAO, digital union, and that DAO has a ride sharing service, there you go. You've just done it, right? Because now what happens is instead of 85% of the cost of your ride going to a company in California, it goes to everyone who's a member of that DAO. And everyone who's a member of that DAO can then make decisions about, well, should we advertise more? Should we put a billboard down off of 495? What should we like? They can make those decisions for the better of all of the ride sharing drivers in that community. So the answer is yes, there are some wonderful applications for the future of work and how the future of work models might be enabled by blockchain technologies and organizations like DAOs, which are the decentralized autonomous organizations I referred to earlier. But that's on the horizon, and it's really exciting to see that come.
Great. We have only a few minutes for maybe two last questions. The first one is, how do you see AI impact crypto and maybe blockchain in general? ChatGPT writing codes for us?
I don't think we should really worry too much about ChatGPT is actually a tool for anthropologists and literary and English majors, because you need to actually have thick description. For instance, if you say, hey, I want sushi, what role are you actually going to get? You've got to actually describe into detail what you want the OpenAI product to produce. So when it comes to blockchain, it's going to be an interesting moment where George told me I had to keep this PG. So I will say potty data on a blockchain is still potty data on a blockchain. So AI isn't necessarily going to be, isn't going to clean your data, isn't going to store it, make it more manageable. And so if you put bad data on a distributed immutable ledger, you're just going to have bad products that come out. So it's going to be very interesting how AI will help us improve data quality, and how AI will go out and scrape data and then improve data quality before we put it onto a node to be sent out to a ledger. George, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think there's also something here that's important, which is as AI, and I'm talking about A with the little I, right? Because we don't have general intelligence. But for AI applications, the data that they use for their training is really important to understand. There are some real issues, and some of them are systemic, about how these models are being programmed. And to know and to make sure that there is a record of transactions, that blockchain, there's a record of transactions about what data is used and how that data use is influencing their model is very important. So I can see a way that blockchain and AI play together. This was actually proposed a long time ago, back during the ICO craze. There was a company that went out there and raised a token, called themselves Deep Brain Chain. Yeah, that didn't work out, but someone will make it work. It just hasn't worked yet.
Great, thank you. And we have one last question. I think today's topic is mostly about talking about the general concepts, but we do have some savvy investors in the audience. So I'd like to, propose this question. Should we focus more on learning about and investing on layer 1, such as ETH, SOL, ADA, cryptos, or layer 2, such as the Matic and others on ETH, or even layer 3?
I mean, I have an opinion. I don't want to overtalk it, but my opinion is when you're looking at investments in a layer 2 or layer 3, this is predicated on your belief and trust in whatever layer 1 they're coming off of, right? So if you are building on, or in this case, you choose to invest in a layer 2 solution, make sure that that means that you believe in the chain that is based around, right? So if this is a layer 2 solution that is being enabled because of Ethereum, make sure that that is something that you've already invested in, studied, researched, etc. So that's the risk, because think of it as, you know, a layer upon a layer upon a layer. If you hear something amazing about a layer 3, but you can't explain to me why you didn't also invest in the layer 2 and layer 1, I'm going to have some questions for you.
Krista, were you going to add anything to that before I make fun of George?
No, I mean, have at it.
Just be mindful that you might be investing in the bubbles. If you're early on in the bubble, you're going to make money if you get in and get out. And whether you're investing in layer 1, layer 2, I love Web3. It's like amazing because all Web3 is built on top of Web 1 infrastructure. Whoever owns the data centers just charges the Web3 guys rent. And so just keep in mind, I'm a big fan of real estate and a big fan of being a landlord. So you absolutely want to encourage people, hey, go out, make $50,000 a month using ChatGPT to do your awesomeness. That way you can actually afford to rent one of my $15,000 a month units because I'm a landlord. And so got to keep in mind when you're talking about bubbles where everyone's hyped, everyone's very excited, there's money rushing in, you've got to be wary if the emperor has no clothes, because you don't want to lose your shirt. Because I think if you still have crypto, your portfolio is probably down 80 or 90%.
George, have you told Samson that Bitcoin is digital real estate?
We've had this fight in class. It's fun. Yeah, it's fun.
So Caleb says, park your money in the church of Bitcoin. It can only go up if you hold on to it long enough.
No, I'm making no price predictions. No.
Oh, and by the way, none of this is investor advice.
It's not invest advice. So that's a disclaimer. I believe our audience gets that. Yet we learned so much from today's discussion. So before I wrap up, I do want to mention that we have at least a dozen questions that we didn't get time to address. So for those of you in the audience who raised the questions, we have your emails. So we're going to reach out later to answer your questions. Just to highlight, there were some questions about business and not-for-profit organizations, their disclosure about accepting crypto payment. There were questions about how investors go about the technical skills to analyze things like smart contracts. I'm also myself very interested in the self-regulation of the exchange industry as well. And there were questions about the Ripple XRP lawsuit as well. So I'm sorry we don't have time to address these questions in this webinar today, but we're determined to answer questions to whoever is interested. And I'd like to take this last minute to thank our panelists for carving time out of their busy schedule and share their insights, their knowledge and experience and tips and tricks with us. I'd like to thank the audience for the great interaction and questions. And finally, also thank UNH Alumni Association for sponsoring and support this event. And there's actually a whole series of such webinars available, and we'd like to engage broader community across the country as well. And I see a lot of reactions from the audience with thumbs up and applause. Thank you very much. My final words would be a final call to encourage everybody to check out our future events. The schedule is available on our unh.edu/alumni website, and also check out our social media accounts. For example, our YouTube channel has a recording of all previous webinars, and today's webinar will be added very soon. So it's 1 o'clock, and I'd like to thank everybody again, and have a great afternoon. Goodbye.